There's a kind of person who doesn't raise alarms. They smile, they seem helpful. But something always feels off. Today, we're exposing a truth most people never see coming. The psychological traits of the most dangerous kind of person. If you've ever trusted someone and felt slowly drained, manipulated, or spiritually poisoned, this is the warning you were never given, and understanding it might just save your sanity. In every individual, there exists a natural desire to be accepted, admired, and valued by society. From a young age, we begin to mold our behaviors and expressions in accordance with what gains approval from others. We smile when expected, we suppress anger when it's inconvenient, and we adjust our language and appearance to suit our surroundings. Over time, this adaptation becomes so habitual that we mistake it for authenticity. But this carefully crafted image, this social facade, is what psychology refers to as the persona. It is the mask we wear to function within the collective world. The persona is not inherently malevolent. It allows us to navigate society, form relationships, and maintain a sense of order. But its danger lies in how completely it can replace the true self. The more one invests in this mask, the more one becomes alienated from their inner world. When the persona is treated not as a tool, but as the entire identity, the individual begins to lose touch with their authentic feelings, desires, and flaws. This is the starting point of internal fragmentation. Behind the persona lies another force, far more ancient and raw: the shadow. This is the reservoir of all that we reject within ourselves. Our rage, jealousy, lust, cowardice, and pain. These elements are not inherently evil. They are simply the parts of us that do not align with the socially approved image we've constructed. But when they are ignored and buried in the unconscious, they do not disappear. Instead, they gain power and secrecy. The more one denies these aspects of the self, the more control they exert from the shadows of the psyche. The person who becomes most dangerous is not the one who openly exhibits their flaws. It is the one who has polished their persona to such a degree that they genuinely believe it is their true identity. They are charming, well-mannered, agreeable, and outwardly virtuous. They speak the language of kindness. They are highly attuned to social expectations and perform them flawlessly. But beneath this cultivated exterior lies a shadow that has never been confronted, only suppressed. What makes this individual so dangerous is not that they are evil in the traditional sense. It is that they are unconscious of their own darkness. They are unaware that their goodness is not rooted in integration, but in repression. And repression is not resolution. It is a ticking psychological time bomb. When the shadow is denied, it seeks expression through projection and manipulation. The person begins to see in others what they refuse to see in themselves. They accuse others of being controlling, selfish, or immoral, never realizing they are describing the very forces that reside within their own unconscious mind. The charm of such individuals makes them especially deceptive. Because they are able to mimic empathy and sincerity, others are drawn to them, trust them, even depend on them. This is the mask at work. But this mask is not held up by conscious deceit. It is maintained by deep psychological denial. That is what makes it so potent. It is easier to spot the person who is openly hostile or cruel than the one who smiles while slowly manipulating your perception of reality. Such individuals often excel in environments that reward appearance over substance. They may become leaders, spiritual guides, influencers, therapists, or healers. Positions that allow them to further refine their persona and suppress their shadow. But their inner world is not peaceful. It is marked by a quiet, persistent inner hunger, a desire for control, superiority, or validation that cannot be satisfied because it is rooted in a self that has never been truly acknowledged. The longer the shadow remains unacknowledged, the more it begins to distort the individual's relationships. They may become subtly vindictive, guilt-inducing, or emotionally exploitative, all while maintaining the appearance of care. They gaslight without intending to, manipulate without realizing it, and dominate under the guise of helping. And because they see themselves as inherently good, they never stop to question their impact. They interpret resistance or criticism from others, not as a reflection of their own blind spots, but as proof of others' inferiority or dysfunction. This is the paradox of the overly developed persona. It creates a person who cannot see the truth of themselves, and thus cannot see the truth in others. Their internal disconnection becomes a collective danger, especially when they occupy roles of influence. Because they appear trustworthy and composed, they are often the last people anyone would suspect of harm. And yet, the harm they cause is not through overt aggression, but through a slow psychological erosion of those closest to them. Their conversations are coded with subtle domination. Their empathy is transactional. Their guidance serves their need to be seen as wise, not the actual growth of others. And all the while, they believe in their own moral clarity. Within the depths of the human psyche lies a series of ancient, universal patterns that shape how we think, feel, and behave. These patterns, known as archetypes, are inherited modes of perception and behavior that exist across all cultures and time periods. They are not learned, they are primordial and embedded in the collective unconscious. Archetypes such as the hero, the victim, the mother, the sage, the shadow, and the trickster are symbolic figures that unconsciously direct the inner lives of individuals. Everyone experiences them. Very few consciously understand them. Most live under their influence without realizing they are being guided by something far older and deeper than personal memory or thought. While most people unconsciously identify with certain archetypes and play out their roles without awareness, there exists a far more dangerous phenomenon. The person who recognizes the psychological power of these archetypes in others and consciously uses them for manipulation. This kind of person is not merely socially intelligent or persuasive. They have an intuitive or learned understanding of the inner architecture of the human soul. They are psychological illusionists who, without formal knowledge of depth psychology, instinctively detect which archetype dominates a person's inner world, and they use that knowledge to gain control. Such individuals do not often present themselves as villains or manipulators. On the contrary, they appear helpful, understanding, emotionally available, and sometimes even spiritually attuned. This is what gives them access. They can recognize when someone is seeking a father figure, and so they adopt the language and posture of authority and guidance. If they detect someone stuck in a wounded child archetype, they position themselves as the savior or healer. When faced with someone living out the martyr or victim archetype, they offer sympathy and validation, only to later turn that dependency into obedience. They become whatever the other person unconsciously needs, not out of compassion, as a strategy to secure control. This manipulation is especially potent because it bypasses the rational mind. Archetypes live in the unconscious, and when someone activates one of yours, intentionally or not, they are not just influencing your behavior, they are reaching into the foundation of your identity. A person who manipulates archetypes is essentially hacking your psyche, and if you are unaware of the forces shaping your own inner life, you won't recognize when those forces are being exploited. They do not need to lie or overtly deceive. They simply play a role that your unconscious craves. They can draw out your fears, hopes, and wounds, and present themselves as the answer to all three. This is the foundation of their power. They mirror you more deeply than you can understand yourself. The reflection they offer is not meant to help you grow. It is meant to keep you dependent. And once you are dependent, you are no longer fully yourself. Often, these manipulators do not realize the extent of their own behavior. They may even believe they are helping because they see the emotional patterns in others. They consider themselves wise or spiritually evolved. What they are truly doing is externalizing their own unconscious hunger for power, admiration, or control. Their charisma is not an accident. It is the persona enhanced by an intuitive grasp of archetypes, and it is used like a key to unlock other people's psychological doors. One of the most chilling elements of this type of individual is their ability to hide behind socially accepted masks. They can thrive in roles of leadership, mentorship, counseling, or any position where people naturally open their inner worlds. Because their language often mimics that of empathy, healing, or empowerment, their manipulation goes unnoticed. But underneath the words lies a subtle dominance, an intention to mold others not for their liberation, for their utility. They are not satisfied with influencing behavior. They seek to inhabit the symbolic space that others unconsciously reserve for gods, parents, or heroes. This is not overt domination. It is the soft, almost invisible occupation of another's internal world. a look, a word, a gesture, carefully crafted to elicit a particular emotional response. They do not overpower you, they align with you, step into the psychological structure you already carry, and then redirect it from within. Their control is not enforced. It is invited, makes it all the more difficult to identify or resist. What makes them especially dangerous is that they are not operating purely from malice or sadism. In many cases, they are unconscious of their own motivations. Their desire to help, to be seen, to be followed, is often rooted in their own unmet psychological needs. But rather than confront those needs directly, they learn to fulfill them vicariously through others. In doing so, they create a closed psychological loop in which everyone around them becomes a mirror, a tool, or a symbol. Their relationships are not truly human. They are mythological. They do not see others as full beings, as characters in an inner play where they alone write the script. The people in their lives are cast into roles: the loyal follower, the fragile victim, the betrayer, the ungrateful child. And should anyone resist the role assigned to them, they are discarded, shamed, or rebranded as the enemy. Because for the manipulator of archetypes, the illusion of control is more important than the reality of connection. Understanding this type of individual requires more than intellectual analysis. It requires the courage to see how susceptible we are to psychological puppetry when we ourselves have not integrated our inner archetypes. The manipulator's power thrives in unconscious territory. Where there is emotional blindness, there is opportunity. Where there is unexamined longing, there is leverage. Within the unconscious depths of the human psyche, there exists a place where all unwanted aspects of the self are stored. The impulses that society condemns, the thoughts we're ashamed to admit, the urges we deny, and the emotions we suppress. This hidden domain is known as the shadow. It contains all that we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves: our capacity for envy, rage, lust, cruelty, cowardice, deceit, and even self-sabotage. These traits are not necessarily evil in themselves. They are simply the traits that do not fit the narrative we tell ourselves and the image we present to others. In the person who avoids self-examination, these repressed elements begin to fester and grow stronger. They become autonomous, and when left unacknowledged, they take over in subtle but devastating ways. There are those who walk through life without ever confronting their own darkness. They construct an identity based solely on what is acceptable, moral, and socially rewarded. These individuals often appear upright, generous, patient, or virtuous. They live through a mask of goodness, unaware that the more rigidly they deny their shadow, the more control it gains over them, unlike a criminal or a known deceiver, who might at least be conscious of their transgressions. This person becomes dangerous precisely because they believe in their own righteousness. They see themselves as incapable of harm, which blinds them to the quiet destruction they leave in their wake. The unintegrated shadow is not content to remain buried. When it is not consciously owned, it forces its way to the surface by projecting itself onto others. The person who refuses to admit their own selfishness begins to see selfishness everywhere else. The one who represses their manipulative instincts becomes hypersensitive to manipulation in others. They walk through the world in a state of constant judgment, convinced that they are surrounded by liars, aggressors, or cowards. What they are truly seeing are reflections of their own denied self, filtered through the lens of projection. This mechanism allows them to maintain their self-image while acting out the very behaviors they claim to despise. In this way, the shadow becomes a weapon, not just against others, but against the truth. The person unconsciously uses their unresolved darkness to punish, dominate, or undermine those around them, all while claiming the moral high ground. They may lash out under the guise of honesty, guilt, trip others in the name of care, or isolate and ostracize people while pretending to act in service of truth or justice. Their language is often cloaked in moral or emotional justification, making it difficult to discern the true nature of their motives. They do not recognize their actions as harmful because they have never confronted the inner forces driving them. The danger of the unintegrated shadow lies in its invisibility to the person who wields it. It allows them to act destructively while believing they are doing good. And the more confident they are in their goodness, the more they give themselves permission to act on behalf of a cause, a principle, or an identity. This is how ideologies become weaponized. This is how spiritual pride corrodes relationships. This is how emotional manipulation hides behind the mask of compassion. When the shadow is not owned, it does not disappear. It simply moves outward, distorting one's perception of reality and rewriting the behavior of others to fit a narrative that protects the ego. Often, this individual does not consciously intend harm. Their destruction is not premeditated. It is psychological in origin. They may even believe they are healing, guiding, or loving. But love without self-awareness becomes control. Guidance without inner clarity becomes domination. Healing without humility becomes saviorism. These distortions are the natural consequence of a shadow that has never been explored. The person's sense of virtue becomes their shield, and they wield it blindly, striking down anything that threatens their carefully crafted self-image. When someone refuses to acknowledge their own aggression, that aggression leaks out through passive, aggressive remarks, subtle acts of revenge, cold emotional detachment. When someone denies their need for power, that need emerges through covert control, through emotional dependency, guilt, or manipulation disguised as caretaking. Every repressed trait finds expression eventually, and the more it is repressed, the more devious and indirect its manifestation becomes. Because this person has no relationship with their inner shadow, they lack the ability to recognize when they are being overtaken by it. They are like a vessel for unconscious energies that speak and act through them, often at the worst possible times. They may erupt in moments of disproportionate anger or slip into chronic patterns of blame, withdrawal, or sabotage, and then rationalize these actions through intellectual or moral arguments. Their mind becomes a fortress of justifications, defending against the one thing that could save them: self-awareness. This is not a matter of intelligence or education. Some of the most intellectually advanced individuals fall into this trap because the ego can use even intelligence as a tool for denial. It can create sophisticated narratives to explain away destructive behavior, masking it behind spiritual language, ethical reasoning, or psychological jargon. The more refined the persona, the more difficult it becomes to detect the shadow, especially when the individual has never been taught how to look inward with radical honesty. Such a person does not need to raise their voice or physically harm others to do real damage. Their shadow speaks through their tone, their silence, their absence, their control of information, their emotional withholding. And because these tactics are often invisible, those around them begin to question their own sanity, wondering if they're imagining the manipulation. The victim of such a person often feels confused rather than hurt, lost rather than attacked. This is the unique cruelty of the unintegrated shadow. It wounds without clarity and damages without accountability. Every person wears a mask. This is not a sign of deceit, but a necessity of civilization. The mask, what ancient thinkers called the persona, is the version of ourselves we present to the world. It is the polished image we wear in social life, designed to meet expectations, gain approval, and protect the fragile inner self. The persona allows us to function in society. It helps us play roles: teacher, parent, leader, friend, lover. But while the mask can be useful and even noble, it becomes deeply dangerous when one forgets that it is a mask. When a person begins to believe that they are the persona itself, they sever their connection to the deeper reality of who they are. The most dangerous kind of person is not the one who lies to others, but the one who lies to themselves so completely that their entire existence becomes a performance. They are not living, they are role-playing. Every word, every expression, every emotional gesture is curated for effect. And the deeper tragedy is that they often do not know they are doing this. The mask has fused with the skin. What began as a social adaptation has become a psychological identity, hollow and glittering. They have forgotten that beneath the performance lies a real, chaotic, vulnerable self that has long been silenced. Such a person becomes a mirror, reflecting back to others only what others want to see. They are skilled in reading the room, adapting their language, their beliefs, even their values, to match the situation. They seem likable, agreeable, often charismatic. But something beneath the surface feels off. There is a strange emptiness behind their eyes, a disconnection, as if the person present is only a fragment of something much deeper that has gone missing. And that's exactly what has happened. They have sacrificed their soul to protect an image. This loss of authenticity is not accidental. It is the result of fear. At some point, the individual learned that being real was dangerous. Perhaps they were punished for their emotional needs, mocked for their individuality, or betrayed when they were vulnerable. And so they constructed a persona to survive, a smiling, composed, rational, or strong figure who would never again be humiliated. But survival became addiction. The persona was not put down once the threat passed. It became their default mode of existence. Over time, the mask becomes seductive. It gains power. Others admire it. Social structures reward it. It opens doors, earns approval, gathers influence. And the person wearing it begins to conflate admiration with love, applause with worth, and popularity with identity. They feel seen, but only through the lens of the role they are playing. The real self, the inner self, becomes buried under layers of performance until even the person can no longer access it. They begin to fear their own silence, their own solitude, because in silence, the cracks appear. And so they fill their lives with noise, with people, with status, with surface-level relationships that never touch the soul. What makes such individuals dangerous is not their malice, but their emptiness. When the real self is denied, the only thing that remains is the need for validation. And that need can become insatiable. It drives them to manipulate perceptions, to play different roles for different audiences, to promise what they don't intend to fulfill, to flatter where they don't feel, and to condemn others who threaten the narrative they've built around themselves. They are not interested in truth. They are interested in maintaining the performance at all costs. This is especially perilous in positions of leadership, intimacy, or influence. Because their persona is so convincing, others trust them. People project onto them their hopes, ideals, and longings, and the performer welcomes this. They need the projection, because without it, they are nothing. But no one can sustain a mask forever. Eventually, incongruence shows. The promises fall apart. The emotional presence collapses. Those closest to them begin to sense the truth. Not consciously, but emotionally. They begin to feel disconnected, uncertain, manipulated. And the performer, sensing this shift, either intensifies the act or begins to lash out. Because they have built their entire identity around a mask, any threat to that image feels like a threat to existence itself. Criticism is not just painful, it is unbearable. Vulnerability is not just uncomfortable, it is shameful. Intimacy is not just difficult, it is impossible. They defend the persona with the same ferocity that others would defend their lives, because to drop the mask would mean confronting a self they have long disowned. Inwardly, they may suffer from deep feelings of alienation, but they do not know where the emptiness comes from. They might feel hollow after social interactions, drained by attention, or lost when alone. But they do not realize that the root of the suffering is their disconnection from the authentic self. They continue to perform, believing that if they perfect the role, become even more successful, admired, desired, they will finally feel real. But the real self cannot be found through the applause of others. It can only be reclaimed through the courage to remove the mask and stand naked before the self. This process is terrifying for the performer. To admit they are not what they pretend to be is to risk rejection, failure, exposure. But without that reckoning, they remain trapped in a spiritual void, unable to connect deeply with others or themselves. They speak, but do not reveal. They touch, but do not feel. They live, but only as a reflection of what others want them to be. And in time, they begin to confuse manipulation for love, strategy for intimacy, charm for character. The world becomes a stage, people become props, and they themselves become hollow actors in a play they no longer understand. What makes a person truly dangerous is not their strength, intellect, or charisma. It is their unconsciousness. The most destructive individuals are often not aware of the harm they cause because they have never turned inward to confront the shadows that drive them. They believe in the mask they wear, unaware that the more tightly they cling to it, the more distant they become from their own soul. Their inner wounds remain unhealed, and instead of confronting the darkness within, they project it outward, onto others, onto the world. The person who refuses to face their shadow, who uses it to manipulate while claiming virtue, who builds their life around a persona and forgets the self underneath. They are the ones most capable of subtle, insidious harm. Their danger lies not in loud violence, but in quiet erosion of trust, of truth, of authenticity. But there is another way. One dares to look inward and see the truth of who they are. Not just the light, but the darkness too. They reclaim their power. They are no longer controlled by hidden forces, no longer dependent on performance, no longer enslaved by the approval of others. Only then can they live not as a mask, but as a whole human being, grounded, clear, and fully alive. And in a world filled with unconscious performances, the person who has met their shadow becomes not just safe, but truly powerful.